Okay, so today we're going to deal with one of those big questions that always come up when people study Parshat Emor. And as Rabbi Jay mentioned, the next 2 weeks are be Pesach-related topics. So our series in Sefer Vayikra is going to take a pause until after the holidays. But so this is the last time we have a chance to talk about Parshat Emor. And because it's the last year before we start doing Sefer Omer and Pesach, etc., and we started that topic last week, so I'm going to dedicate this week's year to the whole section in Parshat Emor in Perek Gimel about the holiday of Shavuot and try to clarify how Chumash presents it. One of the biggest questions that comes up all the time, especially when academics are touching the Bible, and they like to challenge the rabbis, the rabbinic interpretation a lot, is they claim that Shavuot is purely an agricultural holiday, because it never says in the Torah that Shavuot has anything to do with when the Torah was given. And the rabbis will tell you it's Chag Matan Torotenu, it's in our prayers, etc. So I want to try and show you today why the assumption that it's only an agricultural holiday makes sense, but how Chumash sort of hints to you that it also relates to Matan Torah, and possibly suggests why Chumash does it that way. And therefore, that was our title this week, about whether Shavuot is agricultural and historical holiday. And the second title, which hopefully you'll understand soon, is when the moon and the sun collides. Now, that would be a big, that would cause a big, that wouldn't be good for us if they did. But I'm trying to explain to you that we have two calendars. We have a calendar that goes by the sun and by the moon. As we mentioned this week, Parshat Chodesh, our calendar begins with the month in the spring, but our calendar is also linked to the sun because our lives are controlled primarily by what the sun does to us. But the moon sort of is our little calendar in the sky that helps us build our calendar. So what I tried to show you was we'll get back to Parshat Emor in a minute, but what I want to do today is show you that the way to identify the connection between the holiday of Shavuot and Matan Torah begins in Sefer Shemot with the story of the man. I'm going to begin with the review of what we did last week, but I'm going to make my key point in the beginning, and hopefully we'll get through the rest okay. What I want to show you is that all the experiences that take place from the time we leave Egypt until we get to our Sinai are all preparation for Matan Torah, because Am Yisrael isn't ready yet to enter a Brit until they get to our Sinai. And it's very easy to see how all the experience we go through are going to get Am Yisrael ready to accept the Brit. Now, once we get to our Sinai, of course, things will go wrong later on with the story of Chet HaEgel when we have to renew the Brit, but we're going to find cycles of 7 that relate very much to Matan Torah. I want to end, we'll end later on, with the mitzvah of Hakel, because if there's one mitzvah in Chumash that clearly is a reliving of Matan Torah, when we get to the mitzvah of Hakel, which we gather every 7 years, to sort of relive the whole Sinai experience. And that's easy to see that Hakel is reliving our Sinai. Hakel itself is built on the whole Shemitah cycle of 7 years, because we do Hakel every 7 years. The whole Shemitah cycle is going to be very much related to the man experience in the desert, getting us ready for our Sinai. I'm going to try to put all that together and try to show you how, in a very beautiful way, Chumash is using the whole story begins with what happened with the manna, how that prepares us for Matan Torah, and how that will explain why Shavuot relates to Matan Torah as much as it relates to our great harvest. So now we'll get to work, and we'll begin with our review, and hopefully it'll make sense. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, what we did last week, I'm just going to review it real quick. We went over again the story of creation in 7 days, which is setting the stage pretty much for many laws in Chumash. But whenever we have the number 7, it's going to relate to the fact that our understanding that even though there's many powers of nature, there's one God who created all those powers, and we need to do things whenever we relate to agriculture with the number 7 to remember that even though there appears to be many gods, there's really one God who judges us based on our deeds, and based on our behavior, God will use the powers of nature either to punish us or to reward us. And then the mitzvah of Shabbat we saw in the 10 Commandments was our weekly reminder of our covenantal commitment, but Shabbat itself had an element of between God and man, and also between man and his fellow man, as we'll see over and over again through Chumash. And then our topic in The Sefer Vayikra also relates to the idea that the Mishkan is going to be a reminder of Har Sinai in the realm of space. That was a big topic in all through Sefer Vayikra and the end of Shemot, as well as Shabbat is our weekly reminder of the same event in the realm of time. So then the key, I guess the anchor of our whole point was what we did last week in the preparation for Har Sinai. We run out, God intentionally brings us to a place where there's no food, so that we'll complain for food. And then God tells Moshe, tell the people, I'm going to give you bread from heaven, the whole manna experience. The people go out and collect every day. To test them or prepare them or train them, will they follow my Torah or not? The very first, I guess, halachic experience that the Jewish people have 3 weeks before we get the Torah and enter that covenant is the manna experience. And I'm trying to show you this whole theme of the way we serve God is not only in our ritual, but also in how we treat our fellow men. The manna experience itself will be a beautiful combination between our trust in God and dependence on God, at the same time, how we treat our fellow men, because the laws of taking as much as you need, basically not hoarding, and being considerate of other people, is going to be part of our experience that prepares us to receive the Torah. Because this was the commandment that God gave us. When the manna fell every day outside the camp, everyone went out to collect, and you're only allowed to collect ish lefi a person as much as he needs, and the amount that a person was able to connect, or what I tried to explain last week, the utensil that was used to collect the man was called an omer. An omer, we explained, had the volume of a tenth of an ephah, but the omer is a unique word that Chumash uses to tie all these things together. And omer is going to be, seems to be the utensil they used to collect the manna, and they measured using this omer, but in this omer container, which was open, they put as much as they needed for the whole day. And then, if anyone took too much, if people hoarded, it didn't help them at all because it got rotten that night, except on Friday when they could take double, and they used that for Shabbat. And we'll explain, we ended last week's share with this idea of wealth management, which we'll discuss soon. Now, the best proof that there's a very direct connection between the Omer experience and the Mana experience and the giving the Torah, because our symbol of Matan Torah is going to be the covenant, or basically Luchot HaBrit, the tablets that have the contract written in, which we call the Ten Commandments, or Sefer Dvarim, the 10 statements in Chumash. They're kept in a special aron, a special ark, which is held in the Holy of Holies. Again, if the Mishkan is our reminder of Har Sinai, and the big event of Har Sinai is our covenant with God, and that covenant was written in stone in the Ten Commandments. So next to the Aron HaBrit in the Kodesh Kodashim, we're told, God tells Moshe to tell Aaron to take a closed container, it's in and put in it a full amount of man, and put it in front of God for self-keeping for all generations, so everyone see the experience you went through to receive the Torah. So the fact that it's in this container of manna, is next to the Aron HaBrit, in front of God, in this symbol of our connection to God, shows you already that this whole Omer experience, the manna experience, is deeply connected and rooted in the giving of the Torah. Now, then where we ended last week is I tried to show you that if in the desert, this Omer experience prepared us for Matan Torah, and that was our food and staple in the desert, when we get to the land of Israel, we had in Parshat Amor, God tells us, when you come to Israel and you begin your grain harvest, and then we bring this Omer from the beginning of our grain harvest, and we wave it. And we wave it it says Mirachat HaShabbat, we'll talk about that soon, why that's the date, what date that means. We start waving from the day after Shabbat. Is that a Sunday or the day after the first day of Pesach? That's our big discussion. And then we count for 7 weeks from the time you bring the Omer. So I want to summarize one last point. That's the summary of what we did last week, is that the assumption the Chumash is making is that the reader of Chumash understands that the grain harvest in the land of Israel is only 2 months a year. It starts in mid-April, goes through mid-June, and the counting of the Omer coincides with our grain harvest. And our grain harvest, being our staple in the land of Israel, has to last us the entire year. And therefore, when any farmer harvests his field in the spring, he has to hoard because he needs that grain for his whole year and maybe for the year after if there's a famine. And therefore, the most critical time of the agricultural year, as far as who's going to live and who's going to die, other than the rain season, that'll be back in the fall. But in the spring, the outcome of the grain harvest is going to determine what's going to happen the rest of the year. As we mentioned many times, if there's not enough lechem, if not enough grain, there's not enough bread. If there's not enough bread, people fight over the resources that are remaining. And that leads to what's called wars or milchama, with the word lechem smack in the middle of the word milchama, because that's what people were fighting over, at least in ancient, before God got into the picture. And we have religious wars. But usually there's always economic considerations, as we know to this very day. This oil sort of switched. Oil became more important than bread, maybe. Anyway, back to our big topic. So it makes sense that in any culture, people worried about their wealth, their food on the table. And because our grain harvest, as much as we work on it, it's a function of nature, it only makes sense that man would turn to the nature gods to make sure he has grain harvest. And back in Israel, that was Baal and Asherah and a whole list of names. And then Chumash is telling us, during this critical time of the year, I want you to come to my office or come to the Mikdash and remember God's in charge of all the grain. And therefore, it makes sense. It's an agricultural holiday. We're praying to God before the grain harvest begins that it should be successful. And when the grain harvest is over, we have to thank God for that grain harvest and then worry about our fruit harvest. That's reason alone to have a holiday of Shavuot. And I don't even need the connection to Matan Torah to have a holiday. Even if the Torah was given a different time of the year, I would still have Shavuot for a very good reason. Because as we collect our harvest, what do we do? What do we talk about every day? We talk about Omer every day to remember that God is in charge of our food like it was in the desert. And even though we're collecting it on our own or we're doing our own planting, we have to treat our own work, our own harvesting of the grain as though it's a gift from God. That was our first, that was trying to explain why Chumash uses that special word Omer to teach the laws of to talk about during the 7 weeks of our grain harvest. And also, why are we counting specifically weeks and not just days? Because the whole concept of a week began with the Omer experience. Our first experience as a nation, keeping Shabbat and having that 6-day cycle of working and getting double on Friday and then resting on Shabbat, that all began with the manna experience. So we see this deep connection right between 7, again, ever since creation, that prepares us for Shabbat, and understanding about the powers of nature coming from God. Now, when you study Chumash and you do a little bit of math, it's easy. It's clear that the Torah was given sometime in the 3rd month. We arrive in the beginning of the 3rd month at Har Sinai, and Moshe goes up and down, and at least for a couple of days, and therefore it makes sense that early in the month of Sivan, in the 3rd month, is when we receive the Torah. And then you do a little bit of math, and you'll see that the holiday of Shavuot pretty much coincides with the holiday that we call Shavuot. Now, it could be just a total coincidence, or it could be Chumash is hinting to something. Now, there's no doubt it's not explicit. Everyone will tell you that. But the question, why isn't Chumash explicit, and why is it only implicit? Now, again, if you look at our prayer service carefully, Shavuot can never have a lunar date. Remember, all the holidays in more have lunar dates. By definition, Shavuot can't have a lunar date because we're counting 7 weeks and then the 50th day, and we don't know how many days there's going to be in the how many days Nisan's going to be and how many days Iyar is going to be. On the average, it'll come out, but there's no way we can have the exact lunar date because our calendar in its original form was up to us because we decide when Rosh Chodesh is, give or take a day or two. And therefore, there's no way Chumash can say on this day of the 3rd month, on day 6 of the 3rd month, or 7 is going to be Shavuot. Once the rabbis have to make a calendar, it will make sense why they picked the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan, as we'll see. But again, don't expect Chumash to give an exact date when it's impossible with our calendar system to do that. Now, the question is going to be, are there any other allusions to the fact that this time of year is also the time that we got the Torah? So now we have to go and take a look inside. There's one thing we didn't do last week, which I want to return to. Let me just get the... Okay, we had Omer. We talked about the word Omer. I think I talked about it briefly, but the last time Chumash uses the word Omer is in Sefer Devarim, when you're harvesting your field, these are laws in Devarim, which are primarily about how we treat our fellow man, we're supposed to forget on purpose a leftover bundle in the field of our grain when we collect all the grain back to our threshing floor. Don't go back and collect it. Leave it over for the Geri Yotam and Amana, for the orphan, the stranger, and the widow, so that God will bless you. In other words, in every stage of your harvest season, always make sure to leave over and think of the less fortunate people. Like in Megillat Ruth, we have the word Omer again one more time in Tanakh. But again, Chumash is purposely using the word Omer when it's describing the grain that you leave over for the poor people. Because usually there's many other words, like an aluma for a bundle, and a shibolet, or the sheaves of grain, and uluma is a bundle of grain, and zora is a name for barley and chita. It just uses the word omer only in this context of when we have to care about other people. Now, the every 7 years, remember, we gather and talk about Har Sinai. At Hakel, we're going to go back to Hakel at the end of the shir today and see how it connects to Parshat Bahar. I want to get through Parshat Amor first. Now, before we get to Parshat Amor, I just want to prove my point from the very beginning, from Sefer Dvarim. This we didn't do last week. I want to open up a Chumash real quick. I want to show you how Moshe Rabbeinu is going to explain why there was a need to have this Omer experience, to have this Mana experience. And he's pretty explicit. I'll explain first before we read inside, and then I'll show you in the Psukim. Moshe in the 40th year has to get the people ready for the challenges of life in the land of Israel. He's going to tell them, remember your desert experience, to remember the dangers of prosperity getting to your head in the land of Israel. God is worried that once we come into Israel, we won't be in need of God because we can take care of things on our own, and we're going to become wealthy, and that wealth is going to get to our head, and we're going to become haughty and not use our wealth properly. God's not going to say, therefore, be poor, but he's going to tell you, remember in your wealth what to do with your wealth, what I call wealth management. So let me just show you this in chapter 8 in Sefer Dvarim and see how he puts this in the context of the Mana experience that we had in the desert. So we're going to open up our Chumash is not in here, it's right here, in Dvarim, chapter 8. Just using a regular Chumash because it's real simple psukim. It goes as follows. As usual, in Sefer Dvarim, Moshe says, keep all these commandments I'm teaching you, etc., so you live and be worthy of conquering the land and being sovereign. Then he says as follows, remember the whole journey, that God led you the 40 years in the desert, to anutcha, here says, to torture you or to afflict you, like the theme of Pesach again, to test you, to train you, to know whether or not you're going to follow God's laws. It's clear now from here, as well as the Psukim and Shemot, that the Mana experience is a test or preparation and training for whether people will be dedicated and keep God's laws and be his covenantal partner. What did God do? He made us hungry. He afflicted us, made us hungry, and then he gave us the man to appreciate where our food comes from, man that we didn't know about it, and no one knew about it before, to teach you that we don't live to eat, but rather we eat to live. Basically, that God's the source of all our food. And then all these miracles that happened in the desert, of how we survived. And then what do we need to know and understand or internalize? Just like a parent gives their child a hard time to train them to be independent, that's how God's training you in the desert. And therefore, keep God's all laws. Why did God give you this training experience? Because God's bringing you to a land that's very good, the famous land of the 7 species, Eretz Chita v'Sara, the one we know by heart, the land of the 7 species. It has tons of produce. If agriculture goes well and the climate goes right, the land is full of plenty. Remember, Chita v'Sara v'Gefen Teina v'Rimon, Eretz Shemen v'Dvash. Okay, and there's enough, everything we need, the land can provide us with, and therefore we're commanded b'achalta v'sabata u'birachta. Therefore, we're supposed to eat and become satiated, etc., but give thanks to God for the land he gave us, and because he's the source of our food. Now, what's the danger? Hishamar lecha, be careful. You might forget God and not keep his mitzvot when you become wealthy, because your wealth might get to your head. You'll eat and become satiated and build big, beautiful houses. Again, God didn't say it's bad itself, but there's a danger in your prosperity, which we call wealth management. Okay, and all your cattle will grow, your livestock, etc. Gold and silver will go up. You'll have lots of that, and then Bram Lavavecha, your heart might become haughty, and you'll forget God who took you out of Egypt, the God who put you through this training experience in the desert, in this difficult experience in giving you man, the God who gave you man in the desert that you never saw before. Again, to train you, to test you in order for your own good. Because the danger is you might say in your prosperity, my own strength, my own power, I'm the source of all my wealth and prosperity. And now, therefore, God didn't say, therefore, don't become wealthy, but rather, here's the key point, the end of the section. Remember, v'zacharta, remember your God, ki he gives you the ability to have that wealth. Chal here means financial wealth. Your ability, like the word chayil is a lot of anything. So all this chayil, all this wealth that you happen to accumulate in your harvest season, remember that's coming from God. God wants you to use your wealth and allocate it properly. And the whole test we try to explain, the simplest test of allocation of wealth was in the story of the manna, where on Shabbat, every day take as much as you need. You can take double on Shabbat because you don't get on Friday. So you have to hoard on Friday because you won't have on Shabbat. So hoarding is as much as you need sometimes. In the land of Israel, it's very lopsided because we have 2 months of harvest and 10 months where there's no food. And therefore, when I'm harvesting during those 2 months, that's a much more difficult allocation challenge than because I need enough food for 2 days as opposed to for a whole year. And therefore, we have to remember during that 7 weeks of grain harvest, the need to allocate, again, to amass your wealth, to build up your capital, but at the same time, allocate it properly. And we talked about there's no quantitative amount. It's a way of life. Therefore, all these mitzvot surround us during our grain harvest. That was our key point. Now, if that was an experience preparing us for Matan Torah, and God wants us to be a nation serving Him as a model nation, how we behave. So one of the main ways we serve God is how we act as a nation, as a community, and then on a national level, how we manage our wealth. Again, not to be poor, but rather to be wealthy, but how to manage our wealth to make sure everyone in need has what they need, without them becoming overdependent. No, it's helping them help themselves, etc. Which explains why the next time we have Omer is going to be in Megillat Ruth, in the story of Ruth. Now, let me check the chat real fast. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's just the chat's fine. Okay, now let's get back to our main source sheet. And what we're going to do now, we're going to take a look at Parshat Amor, and I want to show you why the rabbis reached the conclusion that we start counting the Omer not on a Sunday, which sounds like simple pshat of the words, but rather on the first day of Yom Tov, okay? Now, here's what we're going to do. I began showing you this a couple of weeks ago when we started Parshat Amor, and I want to show it to you inside. I had this same chart, I just copied it again. If I look at Parshat Amor, what happened to it? No, that's a higher up. Where do I have it? Maybe it's lower down. Give me a second. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Again, I don't expect anyone to read this because it's very small on the screen. I just want to show you that in chapter 23, we did this in the very beginning. We have this opening line, speak to Bnei Israel. These are the Moadim. In parentheses, we talked about Shabbat. And then we start here with Elam Modei Hashem and Pasuk Daled. That starts discussion. It was why Shabbat introduces what's called Tchila L'Mikra Kodesh. Shabbat overrides all the Moadim. The laws of Shabbat are going to be set every 7 days of Shabbat. You can't change that. And even if Yom Tov comes out in Shabbat, and Yom Tov you're allowed to cook, not if it falls out in Shabbat. So then we introduce the Moadim, beginning with Pesach, and we have this lunar calendar. And then we have, even though all these Moadim end in the end of the chapter in Pasuk in verse 44, with Moshe tells the Moadim to Bnei Israel, we have these Moadim in the beginning and the end. There's one section in the middle from verse 9 to 22, which is not a Moed because there's no lunar date. So what we're going to do in class today, we're going to read this with English Hebrew properly. We're going to study this section, which we call Sfirat Omer, and try to understand why the rabbis why the rabbis understand that Shabbat here means the first day of Yom Tov. What we're going to do is we're going to read this as though it was written somewhere else in Chumash. Right? We're going to read this as a standalone, and then notice that what Chumash did, it inserted it in the middle of the Moedim. In other words, I could take out verse 9 to 22, delete it, and all the Moedim now makes sense. All the Moedim have lunar dates. The first Moed is the 14th of Sivan, on the 14th, and then the 15th, 7 days Chag HaMatzot. And then on the 7th month, we have what we call Rosh Hashanah, or Yom HaZikaron. Then we have, on the 10th of the month, what we call Yom Kippur, the 15th of the 7th month. We have Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeret, and then Elam Moedei Hashem. But I have a whole list of Moedim, which have precise lunar dates. One in the spring, and one in the fall. Basically, in the first month, in the 7th month, I have holidays of our based on lunar dates with our calendar, which make a lot of sense. Basically, in the beginning of the spring, and the beginning of the fall, but they hold precise dates. And I insert in the middle of that presentation the laws of Sfirat Omer. What I want to do is I want to read it alone, and then try to understand how would you understand these psukim if they weren't in the middle of chapter 23, if they were just stood alone in Chumash, not inserted in the middle of the Moedim, and then understand why the rabbis interpret it because it's inserted in Chumash in the middle of the Moedim. So let's take a look now. We're going to read out these psukim from verse 9 to 22 in regular English Hebrew Chumash. Okay, or I have on the source sheet. Again, I want you to pretend for a minute that this wasn't in Parshat Amor in the Moedim. Pretend it stood alone. I'll give you an example. What we saw before. In Sefer Dvarim, what did it say? It said in Sefer Dvarim, Ki tiksor tzecha b'sadecha, when you're harvesting the grain in your field, okay, and leave over, if you forget a bundle of grain in the field, don't go back to pick it up. It doesn't say what day of the week or year to do it, whenever you're harvesting the field. So let's go now and read chapter 23. Verse 9 in chapter 23. Again, it's a standalone because it had its own introduction, its own dibur. God tells Moshe as follows. God tells Moshe, Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, Ki tavo la'aretz, when you come to land which I'm giving you, okay, and harvest your grain, kshatem eksira. Again, Chumash is assuming you know this is in the spring, because that's harvest season in the land of Israel. It's unique, there's 2 months of year. What you do as soon as the harvest season begins, you bring this omer, we talked about that special word, from the beginning of your harvest to the Kohen. Now, if I just had these psukim alone, this holiday or this mitzvah has nothing to do with our lunar calendar, has only to do with the season. And whenever it comes out, it comes out. Sometime in the spring, winter's over, right? Grain starts to grow. It might be late March, it might be mid-April, it might be late April. Sometime in March or April, the grain is going to start to grow. And as soon as the grain is harvestable, as soon as the barley, which is the earliest grain in the land of Israel, when you can harvest it and process it, so whenever that begins, it begins. Okay? There's no lunar day here at all. That's my whole point. Not even Passover. Okay? Then we're supposed to wave this omer wave our first grain, like a trophy. Okay? Whenever there's tzodchem. I guess in front of God as you wish, etc. Like when you bring a korban nedava, it's called the tzodchem, like a korban olah, the beginning of Vayikra, this week's parsha coming up. And when did we wave it? Mimorchat HaShabbat. Yes. When did we wave it? After the Shabbat. Now, there's no doubt Chumash is connecting Shabbat to our grain harvest for a good reason, because the whole concept of Shabbat is to remember that agriculture is all coming from that one God and not many gods. So connecting Shabbat to the mitzvah makes sense. And if this was standing alone, I would say whenever in the spring harvest begins, take your first harvest and wait till the first Sunday in your harvest season. But it didn't say what Sunday, didn't say what month, what time of the year. It just says do it on the day after a Shabbat. Okay? And then when you bring this korban, when you wave this omer, you bring a sacrifice with it. You bring what's called a keves, a nice simple lamb. Now, keves tamim shnato min ha'olam. Bring a lamb bring a lamb together with this wave offering. Now, again, what I want to try and explain is, if this was standing alone, I could pick any time of the year. I would just do it on a Sunday. What happened though instead? Chumash inserted this right after the laws of Pesach. No, in the middle of the Moedim, after the laws of Pesach, which is called Chag Aviv, which has a lunar date, it only makes sense because it's inserted in chapter 23, like I showed you above. Because Chumash inserts this whole section in the middle of the Moedim, it's telling you to connect or link this commandment with the holiday of Chag HaMatzot. Now, on Chag HaMatzot, what are we told to do? On the first day of Chag HaMatzot, okay, don't do any Kol Melechet Avodah Lo Tasu. And because on Chag HaMatzot, the first day of Chag HaMatzot is a day of rest, we don't work, it makes perfect sense to associate the Shabbat, the Spirit to Omer, to this Shabbat that we stop working on the first day of Yom Tov. Now, it's not the only interpretation, but Chumash is leaving it open to the rabbis to interpret. In other words, Chumash is not going into the precise detail what day to do it on. It's giving you the concept. And because Chumash inserts these laws in the middle of the Moedim, it makes perfect sense for the rabbis to reach a conclusion that this Shabbat is going to refer to the first day of Yom Tov of Chag HaMatzot as opposed to any Sunday on our calendar. It's not saying, what I'm trying to explain is, it's not saying do it on Shabbat of Chol Hamoed, Pesach, because it has nothing to do, but when it stands alone, it's got nothing to do with Chag HaMatzot. But because it's inserted right after the laws of Chag HaMatzot, it makes sense the rabbis connected to Chag HaMatzot, and therefore it's perfectly fine to take the word Shabbat and refer to the first day, Shabbat referring to the first day of Yom Tov of Chag HaMatzot. On top of that, the first day of Yom Tov comes out to the 16th of the month, and remember when we did the manna story, the first time the manna fell was on the 16th, again, of the second month. Now this is the 16th of the first month. But the fact I'm going to start counting the Omer and use the word Omer on the 16th of the month, I think also relates back to the story of the month beforehand. Now we have to find if there's any other allusions to Har Sinai other than the word Omer and the specific time of the year. What korban do we bring with it? We bring a keves, which is fine. One simple lamb. The beginning of the harvest is like the daily, our daily korban is a keves. That's our default, is a lamb. We bring a keves together with the omer, which is very similar to the korban pesach itself. Okay, now, if you remember from davening here, umitchato, the wheat offering, the meal offering that we bring with the keves that comes with the omer, with the lamb that comes with this omer waving the omer, is 2 esronim solid. Okay, Yisharech Nechoach Hashem, and the amount of wine, a ravi. Now, who remembers from davening what is the classic amount of flour we bring, or meal offering that we bring with whenever we bring a korban? We know it by heart. U'minchatam v'niskem k'medubar, 3 esronim lapar, 2 esronim la'ayu, Yisrael la'keves. Correct? Everywhere else in Chumash, Rashi points this out. Everywhere else in Chumash, whenever I bring a keves, the amount of grain, the amount of meal offering, the solet that I bring, the flour, we call the flour that we bring, is 1 isaron, a tenth of an ephah. Okay, this is the only time in Chumash where there's a korban mincha that comes with the keves. That instead of being 1 isaron, is 2 esronim. Remember on Shabbat, what did we bring? Shnei kvasim, shnei esronim. Remember? We said that yesterday in davening. Yom HaShabbat, shnei kvazim v'neshagrim, shnei esronim solet mincha. Every keves has 1 isaron. Okay, and now what happens? This isaron is going to be, again, a tenth of an ephah. Instead of being a tenth of an ephah, it's going to be 2/10 of an ephah. Anyone want to suggest a reason why? Right, Shushan asked. That was chapter 8 in Devarim. Shushan asked on the chat that we read. It's during summer vacation, so we don't read that. We're not so familiar with Parshat Ekev. Okay, back to thing. Anyone want to suggest a reason why the only time we bring two esronim is with the omer?
Yeah, to remind us of the omer we got from the man.
Yeah, and what was the omer's measurement?
Saron.
The omer, it says, was an asiri taifah. Remember that last line in chapter 16 in Shemot? The omer was a tenth of an ephah. So to differentiate this, remember, we had this whole discussion last week, what the word omer means. A lot of people think an omer is a measurement. Now, I remember I gave the example of having 2 cups. There's a cup of measurement or a utensil. So I'm explaining, Omer has to be a utensil because I need a utensil to collect the manna. The volume of that utensil was a tenth of an ephah. But all through Chumash and all of Tanakh, a tenth of an ephah is always called an isaron. Again, I'll show you the pasuk we had. It was chapter 8 that was in Devarim we had. If I go back to what we did last week, Mot 16. We had the whole story of the man that we just read in detail last week, reviewed this week. The very last line is a type of a footnote at the end of, or an end note. The Omer, this container, held a tenth of an ephah. So because I'm calling this wheat that I'm waving, the beginning of a grain harvest, I'm giving the special name Omer to connect it to this story. I would differentiate between this Omer and the Omer itself, which was the tenth of an ephah. And therefore, with the keves that comes with the Omer, I bring two esronim. This again, Rashi points out it's unique. It's the only time that I bring that the meal offering is two esronim instead of one isaron. I'm trying to give a logical reason why Chumash is making this different. Because Omer, in its original story, is a tenth of an ephah. So I want to do something a little bit different and have the mincha that comes with the keves with the Omer is going to be 2/10 of an ephah. That's all. Again, it's the rabbis point out that this meal offering is unique. Again, there's one klal all through Chumash, which we say all the time in davening. Remember in Sefer? Let me show you in Sefer Bamidbar. Where are we? Okay, 1 second. I'm going to read Ruth. I'll read your Ruth. Actually, explain me what you wrote while I'm opening up my Chumash. You wrote something, Ruth. You had a question. Just say it.
Right. So once the rabbis have decided once they're commenting on the insertion of this Omer story into the in the Moadim, then they could have easily have deemed the Shabbat to be the Chol HaMoed of Pesach.
Could have, yeah.
Right. So my question is, why? Why did they pick? Why did they not do that?
Okay. So they had the right to pick whatever they wanted. They could have.
Yeah.
I'm saying Chumash is leaving leeway to the rabbis. You decide. You follow?
Right. So I'm just asking,
Yeah.
is there any discussion in the Gemara that
No, it just says they argue with the Tzdukim. The Tzdukim. What I want to say is, I want to say that the rabbis had more pshuto shemikra than the Tzdukim, because it doesn't say to do it on Chol HaMoed Pesach.
They say Hashabbat, so it's highlighting a specific Shabbat, and the Shabbat they're talking about.
Shabbat that was just mentioned in the last section on Chag HaMatzot.
Right. So does that?
That's when we shoveit the man also. Remember, we shoveit al chametz.
Right. So if the Tzdukim hadn't voiced their opinion first, could the rabbis have?
Oh, maybe that's an historical question. No, what came first? Okay. All I'm saying is, no one's reading Chumash right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Chumash is leaving leeway for there's no way. Again, but that's the title. When the sun and the moon collide, I have a mitzvah that has nothing to do with the moon. Got it? It has everything to do with agriculture in the seasons, hence the sun. But I'm having a calendar. I need a date. You follow? So pick a date. I'm saying picking, connecting it to the first day of Yom Tov makes this much sense as connecting it to the first day of the week. On top of that, the 16th of the month is beautiful because that's when the month first fell on the 16th of the month. That was when for us, remember? Because it stopped on the 15th and the 16th. Right? So I'm not saying there's logic what the rabbis did. Did they have to do that? No. But the fact they did it doesn't mean that it's clearly not wrong. But they had the right to do what they did. And there's logic to what they did. They could have decided something else, but it makes sense what they did. I just want to show you that the two esronim in chapter 15 in the book of Devarim, in the book of Bamidbar, in 15, it says, when you come to the land of Israel, when you bring a korban, you couldn't do this in the desert. Whenever you bring an olah or zabach, etc., you bring a mitcha. You always have to bring a flour, a meal offering, whatever, a flour offering of solet, together with oil, etc., and wine, the libation, etc. And then if you bring what's it saying? If you bring a bakar, we have the amount of wine based on the side of the animal. And if you bring a cow, you bring how much? 3 for a cow, for a par, for a bull, and then for a the ayo you bring two, and the first one here. If you bring a keves, you bring a solet, an isaron, and a revitaim, and then if it's an ayo you bring two esronim, and a bakar you bring three. We say every day in davening, every day, every yom tov. It's always an isaron lekeves. The order in Chumash is the opposite we say in davening, because we have the bakar, then ayod, and so on. Let's just show you that the only time in Chumash that we bring two esronim with the keves is here. Rashi points that out, but then explain why. But he points out that this is unique. I'm trying to give a logical reason why Chumash is doing that, because the Omer itself was a tenth of an ephah, and by making this one double, it's hinting to the idea that it relates to the Omer of the Manas story. That's all. And I'm trying to point out why the rabbis make such a big deal between Matan Torah. Now, we're going to run out of time already. Now, what happens? We count weeks now, which makes perfect sense, because the whole idea of weeks relates to agriculture. Now, maybe I'll add to Ruth's question. It should relate to Sunday, right? So what am I doing? So I'm going to begin counting my weeks with the first day of Chag HaMatzot, which is also never called Chag HaAviv, because it's always in the spring, because God took us out of Egypt in the spring. But I want to bring 7 back into the picture. If I'm not starting on a Sunday, got it? I'm starting on the 16th of the month, I want to make sure I have weeks. And therefore, what do I count? I count 7 weeks, 7 Shabbatot. The holiday is screaming 7, to the point the holiday is called weeks. So the whole idea of a Shavua, you can't miss that the concept of a 7-day week, which goes back to creation and the God who made all the powers of nature, and this critical time of the agricultural year, of course it's 7. But then Chumash is going to connect all these things to Matan Torah. Now, real quickly, let me show what happens on Shavuot. So we bring a nice simple offering on the first day you bring the Omer. And then with this famous law that you can't touch the new grain, the new grain of this year, you don't touch it until you wave the Omer. Now, that means being patient maybe a couple of days. Got it? Just be patient for a couple of days until you bring it. Doesn't mean waiting for, if you apply this law outside the land of Israel, that's a big chumrah. Remember with Chadash and Yashan? And I'm saying the whole logic of Yashan, of waiting for the beginning of the grain harvest, makes perfect sense when my agriculture has one grain season a year, and therefore be patient. Don't touch the new grain until the rabbi makes that, there's a special ritual to give thanks to God for that. It means being patient for a couple of days at most. But if our grain harvest is more than once a year, the law just doesn't fit. That's all. I'm trying to bring a logical reason why it makes sense that this law only applies in the land of Israel. That's all. I'm not saying it's wrong to be machmer in chutz la'aretz, outside land of Israel. That's fine if people want to. I'm saying pshuto shamikra, understanding the logic behind this law and the agricultural season in Israel, it makes sense. It's a law that only applies to the agriculture in the land of Israel. That's all. Now, then we count, right, from after that Shabbat that we started counting from the time you bring the Omer, 7 weeks, and that counts 7 weeks, remember, and then the 50th day will be special. Then the first time you bring the new grain in the temple is going to be on Shavuot. Now, people think Bikurim is bringing you first fruits, and there's all these Shavuos pictures of people bringing fruit baskets to the temple, right? Now, Imshat, it's the first wheat, it's the Bikurim. Because even though at home, I can start eating barley, and whatever grows after I wave the Omer, on Shabbat, as soon as Chalamot Pesach begins, in the temple, I still use last year's grain to bring the meal offerings, because it's always from Chita, and therefore I'm going to wait until Shavuot to bring the first flour offering in the temple from the new grain. So 7 weeks earlier, outside the temple, we can eat the new grain. In the temple, we wait until Shavuot, and we have a special ceremony. We make bread, shtei lechem, which again goes back to that idea of double on Friday, with the Omer. The idea of we bring shtei lechem, what's called shtei lechem, Dafka 2 again, which reminds us of the Mana story beautifully. And then each one in Isaron again, and then but make it chametz. The only time you bring chametz, officially, thing, which of course relates to the fact that Passover has passed over, and now it's okay. Now, if chametz is sort of representing your wealth, or like maybe a little bit, it's okay to use your prosperity if you keep the if you use it with the Torah's guidelines. That's all. I call back to my wealth management, but that's the bikurim of Yom HaBikurim. It's not. I don't bring my first fruits, grapes, and they're not in season yet. But it's the beginning of our grain harvest. From then until Sukkot, Chag HaSik, then I can bring bikurim from the rest of my fruit. Now we bring a special korban with this lechem. Vikratim ala lechem. This is a strange korban. This is what happens. Okay, you bring 7 lambs. Okay, sound familiar? 7 lambs, b'nei shana, 1 cow, 1 par, or 1 ox. Okay, 2 elim, 2 rams, as an offering, as a mikra, but it's a isharech nechoach Hashem, and a sir lachatat. And then 2 more kvasim for zevach shlamim. So tell me this again. I'm going to summarize the korban. We'll have a quick discussion. Every day we bring a little lamb. Remember, one evening, one in the morning, in the evening. Okay. Shabbat we bring double. Okay. And now what's happening? What's happening now is, what are we doing now? Yom Tov, I'm sorry. Every Yom Tov, we always bring with the Korban Musaf. Remember, there's always parim. It's usually 1 par, 2 parim, 1 ayo, and 7 kvasim. And it's tir lachatat. You know that from davening. Now, so the extra Korban is very similar to the Yom Tov Korban. And the rabbis have a discussion. It sounds just like what we bring on Yom HaBikurim in Parshat. Let me take a look. I'll show you. If I look we're in Sefer anyhow. In chapter 29, it's going to be, or 28, probably still. In Parshat Pinchas, chapter 28, we have on the first day of Chag HaMatzot. Remember, you bring Vikrafta Mishel Hashem. We bring 2 parim, 1 ayo, and 7 kvasim, and a sir lachatat. That's classic. In addition to the regular korban, and then the famous ke'ela, every day of Chag HaMatzot, you bring the same musaf, 2 parim, 1 ayo, and 7 kvasim. Okay. On the 7th day is holiday. Then what happens?
Hi, sweetheart.
Then Bikraftim Olam. Sorry.
I'm listening to a shir. Can I call you right back?
Second. What happened? Oh, it's the next chapter now.
Okay, I'll call you right back.
Chapter 29.
10 minutes. Okay.
No, I skipped something. Back to chapter 28. I missed something at the end. We had Chag HaMatzot. Oh, here's it. Verse 26. Uv'yom HaBikurim. That's referring to what we just had. Remember, Parshat Pinchas, chapters 28 and 29 in Bamidbar is linked to the Moedim. It's the same commandment. In the Moedim, it says Vikrafta. You bring a special korban, Vikrafta Misha. It's referring to what's in Sefer Bamidbar usually. But now, what we bring on Yom HaBikurim here, what do we bring? When you bring your Mincha Chadasha Hashem B'Shavuotechem, that's clearly Shavuot. It's linking to what we said. Mikra Kodesh instead of don't do work. You bring an olam, you bring 2 parim, 1 ayo and 7 kvasim, and a sir lachatat. It's almost the same korban, but what flipped around? Instead of 1, here it says 2 parim, vice it says 1 par, and there it says 1 ayo, and here it's 2 elim. Got it? 7 kvasim is the same. And it's almost the same korban. I switched the parim and the elim. Now, Rosh Chodesh, as we know, and all 7 days of Chag HaMatzot are 2 parim, 1 ayo, and 7 kvasim, and sir lachatat. That's classic. Same thing on here on Shavuot as well. Now in Parshat Emor, we don't have any of these what's called the korban musaf. Only with the shtei alechem. Got it? Because when it's presented, it's got nothing to do with these with the moedim. Okay. Now. So is that the same thing and they didn't copyright? Or is it a special korban? What do the rabbis understand? This is an additional korban that comes with the lechem. You know what I'm saying? This is a regular korban musaf, the 2171. 2 parim, 1 half 7, it's like Rosh Chodesh Chag HaMatzot. That's classic. That's Parshat Pinchas. In addition to that, we bring the shtei alechem. Now what I want to show you is that let's go back now to our shtei alechem. And there's something else special about this korban. In addition to the again, it's one par instead of two, and two elim instead of one. Otherwise it's the same, but it's a special korban that stands by itself. And also when it's presented, it's a different order. What do we bring? We bring the kvasim. We mentioned the kvasim first. There we have par, ayil, keves. Here it's kvasim 7, then par and ayil, 1 par and take 2 elim, therefore 7. And in addition to that, we bring 2 kvasim for shlamim. This is the most important part. No other holiday has a zebach shlamim. Just a quick, let me stop the share for a minute. A shlamim is called a peace offering. We call a cookout. Basically, a zebach, when you want to eat meat, to this day, you shecht it, just like you did in the temple. If you had a temple, you would put the blood on the altar, and the chalef also goes on the altar on top, and you eat the animal. You give the kohen what he gets, etc. But the rest of the animal we eat. Nowadays, that's called kosher meat. So we drain the blood and we don't eat the chalef. The temple that went on the altar. That's a shlamim. In Chumash, it's only a korban nedava. It's a voluntary korban, only brought by a yachid, by an individual. Okay? The tzibor never brings a shlamim. Is that clear? Now, the tzibor brings an olah every day, and every yom tov, they go look. Tzibor brings a chatat on the holidays. So olah and chatat are brought by the tzibor. Pesach is a special sort of like mixture. The whole nation brings it, but it's a korban yachid that the tzibor brings together. But a korban shlamim of the tzibor is unheard of. Got that? So there's something very special about after the 7 weeks over that the nation of Israel brings the korban shlamim. Now, some people have a custom of prayer in the morning, and they need to say another kaddish rabbanan, so they need to read a mishnah. I'm joking. Okay? And the mishnah we read is right before kaddish rabbanan at the end of the morning. Now, one of those mishnot begin that we categorize all the different korbanot. Okay, zivchei shamei tzibor v'shamot. Where do we shech them, etc. People just mumble it. Okay, zivchei shamei tzibor. There's only one example of a shlamim of a tzibor. Remember, a korban tzibor is the nation brings. The only time once a year that Am Yisrael brings a shlamim is going to be on Shavuot. Okay. Okay. So Ed's asking. I guess everyone's mixed up. I see. Okay. If you understood your sinner, you know all this by heart. But we just mumble it. It shouldn't be so mean.
What's the purpose? What's the purpose of the solas with every korban? Why is there solas with the oil?
Okay, so I'll explain you. Perfect question. Parsha Vayikra this week, so I'll take a minute. Okay? Why do we have to feed God? We don't have to feed God. But you have to do something. Got it? Because you can't do nothing. You have to show God your appreciation for your food. Most people need to stay alive, okay? And they need to eat. What did we do? What did humans do? This goes back to Tzedel Medokim. I mentioned briefly last week. What do humans do? Humans eat, right? But we came up with this great idea of domesticating wheat, processing food, process flour, and make bread. And remember, the domesticated animals, they eat the yerek yesef. They eat the shrubbery. We can't eat shrubbery. We only have one stomach. They eat the shrubbery for us, and we domesticated sheep and cows, etc., or what's called cattle, tzonu bakar, and they're our extra stomach. Okay, they keep us alive. It was a great chap. It's a great invention. And therefore, that we process wine is also uniquely human. We take the things that are our typical diet, which are uniquely human, that differentiates from animals, which is our day-to-day life, and we want to attribute that to God. And therefore, symbolically, what do we bring every day? We bring a keves, which is so neat because not only do we get meat from it, we get milk and we get clothing, which is also uniquely human clothing. And bringing a keves is such a perfect daily reminder of God giving us the ability to be creative. Okay. Bring wine with it. Remember, these are the things we make special brachot on Shabbat. To remember every 7 days, we make a special blessing on wine, on challah. Got it? Those are special brachot we make, right? And have a fleishik meal. If you're not a vegetarian, but you do something uniquely human. Now, once a day I do something, and then on special days here I go extra on it. Now, just like if I'm having a meal, I need bread with it. If I'm bringing a symbolic sacrifice to God, when I come to the temple, I'm looking at my home. Okay? It's my model home. And just like in my home, I want to dedicate my life to God. So in my home, I eat meat and I have bread and I have wine and I have flour, etc. And I have it in proportion to the amount of meat I'm eating. Therefore, the amount of flour and bread is proportionate to the amount of what I'm eating. Now, there's one precedent to the nation of Israel bringing a shlamim. And guess when that is? At Har Sinai. Okay, got it? Now, there's only one time, actually, there's one other time, we'll see in a minute. If I go back, I'll open up by Chumash again. You were there, because this one, remember when we said Nasa v'Nishma? We've done this many times. Ooh, where we go? Let's open up Exodus, chapter 24, go to 24:7. Remember? Moshe comes down, tells the people all the laws he got on Har Sinai. Moshe writes down all the words of God. They build a Mizbeach, puts up 12 monuments. He sends the young people of Israel. At Har Sinai, we took blood. We had a shlamim of the tzibor, of the nation, and we put that blood into big containers. We read the Sefer Rabbi, and Moshe sprinkled the blood on the people. Okay, now, okay, I agree. That was parim and not kvasim, but it was a shlamim. That's the main thing. That was a korban shlamim of the tzibor. That was a one-time event. It's repeated one other time in Chumash, which is really important. We just read about the Shekhinah returning on when they put the Mishkan together. In Chumash, that happened on Yom HaShmini. In Sefer Vayikra, chapter 9. On Yom HaShmini, there's a special korban when the Shekhinah returns. God tells Aaron to take a chatat and urla, and B'nai Yisrael, on the day the Shekhinah returns, we're living Har Sinai again, because the Shekhinah returned like in Har Sinai. Okay, B'nai Yisrael bring a sirizim lechatat, and an egel and keves b'nei shanat v'b'le'olam, v'shor v'ayel d'ishlamim, d'izbach v'pnei Hashem v'itchab l'ulav Hashemen. On the day the Shekhinah returned, when the Mishkan becomes functional, we bring another a shlamim of the tzibor. Now, most of this korban is going to be repeated every year on Yom Kippur. Remember, what are we doing? The Yom HaShmini korban, the day that Mishkan becomes functional, when the Shekhinah returned, Aaron brings a chatat and olah, and Bnei Yisrael bring a chatat olah shlamim. Now, that's only time, that was a one-time event. Now, I repeat this every year on Yom Kippur without the shlamim, because what happens in Yom Kippur? Aaron brings a chatat olah, and Bnei Yisrael bring a chatat olah. Remember, sirizim lechatat, etc. But we don't have a shlamim, because you can't have a shlamim in Yom Kippur. So I'm going to relive the day the Shekhinah returning on two holidays. On Yom Kippur, which is the day we got the second luchot to make this, to make it eternal, to make it livable. I'm going to repeat this, but I can't have a shlamim on Yom Kippur because it's a fast day. When do I do the shlamim? I do the shlamim on Shavuot when we got the first luchot. That's all. So what I'm trying to show you is that the only time in Chumash that you have a shlamim, the tzibur brings a shlamim, is on the holiday of Shavuot. Okay, why kvasim? That's a different story, because it could be then it's parim. It can be any of those animals. But the idea that we have what's called Zivchei Shamay Tzibur, the nation brings a shlamim. It happened in Har Sinai when the Shekhinah came to us the first time. It happened again in Yom HaShmini when the Shekhinah returned after Chet HaEgel. I'm going to repeat the yearly Yom HaShmini Korban, re-cleansing the temple on Yom Kippur, on the anniversary when we got the second luchot that enables our Brit to be livable. But on Shavuot, which coincides more or less with the day we got the first luchot, I'm going to bring a shlamim. The fact that the tzibur brings a shlamim with the shtei alechem on Shavuot, I think alludes to Har Sinai. That's all. Again, because there's no other logical reason why the tzibur brings a shlamim. So that was my point. I think Chumash is alluding to these events. Now, why does Chumash allude? That goes back to when we studied Har Sinai. The date of Shavuot, remember, is it's not explicit, isn't it? We talked about the idea you have to look. we tell the message, the media is the message. Then it's the way Chumash tells the story. We need to go plan A, plan B, were the people able to see God or not at Har Sinai? There's how close can you be to God? And what exactly happened? Yeah. Did God talk directly to the Jewish people or not? It was unclear. If you read the Psukim very carefully and do sort of, read between the lines, you can see the people asked to hear God directly, and they heard the first two dibrot from God directly. But if you don't look for that, you won't find it. Remember, Shavuot, the day of Matan Torah, we don't want to limit it to one day. Remember, Bayom Hazen instead of Bayom Hahu, we come to Har Sinai. Chumash goes out of its way not to give us the date of Har Sinai. Again, we can calculate the date. What happens? We get stuck on both sides. We want to say that Shavuot is not the anniversary of Matan Torah because it's not the 6th or the 7th. It's not the. It doesn't say so inside. What I'm getting at is that Chumash doesn't tell us the date of Matan Torah. It tells us the day we left Egypt. That's explicit. Chumash goes out of its way not to tell us the date of Matan Torah, and it goes out of its way not to tell us that Shavuot is the day of Matan Torah, or we say Zman at the same time here, but it goes hand in hand. But Chumash wants you to study, right, and look for the connection. And what my key point I'm trying to make is our preparation for Matan Torah included an experience of wealth management. Right? The 3 weeks before Matan Torah, what do I do with my grain, with my food? Right? Taking as much as you need, not as much as you want, and hoarding when you need to hoard. That mana experience, which was training us for Matan Torah, which says that explicitly, the mana and the seno, we follow my law or not. The core idea that the way we serve God, and the key message of Matan Torah, is the way you serve God is how you treat your fellow man, because every man is B'Tselem Elokim. It's so fundamental to Matan Torah. So don't be surprised that on the holiday, when we thank God for our agriculture, we need to remember the theme of the month. Now, let me just prove it to you that that's got to be the underlying message. Because we have all these laws of Shavuot. Okay, we ran out of time already. I shouldn't do this faster. We have all these laws of Shavuot, the special Korban, this Korban Shlamim. And then on this very day, we have a Mikra Kodesh Yelachem. Then we talked about the Zebach Shamim, which is unique for this day. And we wave, again, we do this waving. If we have time, when we get back to Vayikra, I'll explain all this waving has to do with the 7 days of Miluim. When you wave something, it's like it's like showing how important something is when you wave it. Like Yulula Venetrog, etc. When you have a trophy, you wave it. So you wave this offering in front of God with the kvasim, with the kvasim and with the lechem, etc. And you call it that day, a special day we don't work, okay? And we do this forever. And then we add a law at the very end. When you're harvesting your field, don't leave. Make sure to leave over a corner of your field, kopeyah. Leave over leket when you're collecting the different sheaves, and also and basically leave over for the poor all the time, called wealth management. Leave it for the poor, the ani, for the poor and the stranger. Leave them over. Ani Hashem Elokechem. Now that pasuk is a copy paste from chapter 19. We did this now when we did chapter 19, which was right beforehand in Sefer Vayikra. Remember good old chapter 19, Kedoshim to you. You can't miss the connection between Kedoshim to you and Matan Torah. It's a giveaway. Remember? Ani Hashem Elokechem. Remember that phrase, Ani Hashem Elokechem? And the 10 Commandments that are not even hiding, they're staring at you. And then in the middle of these laws, which are, remember, all the first 4 or 5 commandments, all of a sudden we have this law of the law of leket shicha and peah, again, not only with your grain harvest, but with your fruit harvest as well. You have the exact same psukim. We had this already. Why am I repeating in Parshat Emor? Because the purpose of your counting the Omer for 7 weeks is to translate that to verse 9.
Hang on, Tzaddik.
What I'm trying to show you is that what Chumash is telling you in this little insert.
And hear you so well. What?
1 second. Let me do a quick. Oh, sorry about that. What I'm trying to show you is that what Chumash is doing, it's inserting the law of Shavuot, which is all about wealth management during our grain harvest, to remember the Omer experience. And then, why am I doing this ritual of talking about Omer for 7 weeks, every day of my grain harvest? Because the goal is to apply it during your grain harvest. It's not little add-on. The goal of Shavuot is to get to verse 22 of V'kutzechem ekseretzachem. It's how to apply that to your day-to-day life. And what's so nice about it, that's the deep meaning of ritual in general. It's got to be transformative. There's a big difference between praying to God and bringing sacrifices, feeding God, and He'll give you grain, as opposed to bring a symbolic sacrifice to remind yourself why God chose you, and give food not to a God, but rather to your fellow man. I'm not feeding God to get grain. I'm giving a symbolic korban that looks like I'm feeding God. To remind myself that the way God will bless my produce if I feed those who are in need, if I feed my fellow man, especially the one in need. We saw that in Parshat Mishpatim. We've seen that everywhere. It's such a mega theme in Chumash. But you have to know the agriculture in Israel and know all the precedents to appreciate what Chumash is giving over. Now, why Chumash isn't explicit? That's a general question. Why Chumash does things you have to figure out on your own. That's their Torah, not to be explicit, because like in every educational process, when you figure it on your own, it's much more meaningful. I'm trying to show you the big question everybody brings up. Oh, don't tell me Shavuos is Matan Torah. The old academics to tell you, oh, the rabbis made it up. No, the rabbis are reading Chumash super carefully. And the fact there's a Zevach Shlamim, which is unique to Matan Torah, and the day the Shekhinah returns, which is the essence of Matan Torah. And the laws of what Torah is about, that the way we serve God is by how we treat our fellow man. And I need ritual to remember how we have to behave, because I need to do something symbolic. But ancient man brought korbanot to feed the gods, so the gods will feed them, to provide for them. We're doing something different. We're bringing korbanot, but we're remembering what we need to do with our agriculture. We call wealth management. And then it becomes a super meaningful holiday. And the rabbis relating it to Matan Torah, it's called Zmat. We're not saying it happened on this day. And I'd have this holiday even if it didn't happen this time of day. But just like God orchestrated our freedom from Egypt to be in the spring, and He orchestrated the Torah being given to coincide with our grain harvest in the land of Israel. Because the main way we apply it is in our day-to-day life. So that was our, I'm way over time. I'm sorry, I got to stop here. So we'll, next we have all this Pesach stuff coming up. We'll talk about Chametz a little bit, but we'll get back to Vayikra after, in time for Yom Ha'atzmaut. Let me just check the chat real fast. There's chapter 8 in Devarim. Okay, we never hit. Okay, the various korban we did, and the korban man-made. Wait a second. Okay, we'll talk about the man-made. Oh, why not honey? Oh, that's cute. Wine is man-made. Very good. Wine is man-made, and honey is not made by man. It's made by bees, I guess. Depends what dvash we're talking about. That's how to do a sweet. Okay, that's a different topic we have to talk about.
Yeah,
maybe we'll
either
do
way,
it.
whether it's bee or date honey, it's not processed. It's not
It's not a chiddush. Yeah, it's not a chiddush of man. It's part of nature. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, have a good week, everybody. And remember, next week we have all the Mayun. Just follow all Jay's emails. Okay, bye-bye.